So, second solo chat, and this chat is about healing, learning, and growing. And I have a lot of things that are going on in my mind today, and thinking about healing, and thinking about are we ever done healing once we start? Once we start the process, is it ever completed? And I don't know about anybody else, but I can say with myself that my experience has been once one thing is worked through and I get into a good spot, something else tends to come up. Something that has been buried underneath resurfaces. And, thinking about that, like, why is that? Well, I mean, there was a lot of things that were instilled in us at a very young age that were to keep us going that we didn't actually agree to. We fell into other people's beliefs. We fell into the stuff that we caught around us from the adults that were there, from the caregivers, from, the media that was going on, all of the things that we took in and the scenarios that we took in. And, for me, having a childhood that wasn't the picture perfect, which really, is there any picture perfect childhood? I don't know of anybody who's ever had one. But there's a lot of things that get surfaced when I'm feeling good. And I think that is that, it gives us that chance to be able to work through it now that we're in a place in our lives that we can work through it and comprehend and understand. One of the first things for me to be able to understand is that, like, my beliefs were formed, science was formed from the point of being in the womb, third trimester, to about the age of 7. That's when our beliefs and habits and everything are formed. So there's things that we picked up that no longer serve us. So those are going to surface, and they're going to surface all the time. And those take place in the form of, like, hey, I don't feel like I can do this. Well, says who? Like, that becomes the question that I ask myself now at this point. Like, when I have a thought coming up that is, why are you doing this? Like, you can't do this. Like, who makes you think that you could put this out into the world? Or, for example, even with this podcast and these videos and, what am I even doing with this? And the thoughts will come up in my head. So I have to counter, like, yeah, I can do this. And who am I not to do this? And who says that I cannot? Who says that I'm not good enough? Like, challenging that little voice back to say, who am I not? And there's so much that happens on a day-to-day basis that is going to get brought up to us, and it's going to surface in a way that we typically never expect, because how can you really expect your emotions except that you're trying to predict them? We do tend to try to predict our emotions based on what we've been through in our past. On one level, that's not entirely an awful thing to have happen, because it does help give us an awareness of the situations around us, that something feels familiar. However, we have to also know when that familiar feeling is coming up for us to basically recognize and to kind of dive into it, to look into it as to what is this trying to tell me? So that same goes with that voice and then these situations that, hey, when this is coming up and telling me that I can't do this, is this true? Says who? Do I have any evidence to say that I cannot? Especially when we're starting something new. Do you have evidence to show that you cannot do this? Failure is never failing. As long as you are taking what you're learning and you're applying it to something else, failure is never failure. The only failure is that failure to start. That failure to actually show up for yourself because you believed the voice that was going on. You let that scenario that felt familiar guide where you're going next. And what sense does that make when we've actually never done the thing? We are capable humans of so much. Our mind is capable of overcoming so many incredible things that we can do the thing. We can put ourselves out there. We can build a brand new life by becoming someone new, by not shifting and staying not shifting back into that identity of I can't and I don't, I don't know how, so I can't show up. And just hands up and saying, you know what, I can't do this. So often I see people who I very much, I love and care for, give up right when they're on that brink of that breakthrough. Or they're going through something from a relationship. They're going through this like hard place. I have a doggy down here. They're going through this hard place and it feels like that's going to be their home forever. So tend to make permanent decisions based on these temporary emotions coming up because that's what we're used to, until we break out of that. And, I've watched these friends who are so incredibly intelligent, have so much that they can give in so many different areas, and they know it. They know it and they feel it. But that little voice lets that stop. That little voice keeps them from going on to that next level. And I know I've let that little voice talk to me for way too long. I've let that little voice show up and say, what are you doing? You can't do this. You don't know what you're doing. Nobody's going to listen to you. Oh, why would you think that you could put this out there? Why would you think that anybody would want to hear you? Because I feel it. Because I feel that there is something more. I feel like there's something more guiding me. And I talk a lot about that feeling and knowing that there is something more, knowing that I'm being drawn to something more, and letting myself go with that. Like, we are able to show up and change as many times as we need to. Because going back to the beginning, is healing ever done? Or do we have more that we get to work through so that we can keep evolving? And that's what life is. It's a constant evolution. We didn't get here as humans because we all stayed the exact same way. So why would we in our own life just choose to stay that same course? We're always evolving. And the question this week for me has been, my point of learning and healing is around the question of, what would it look like if I were to make myself a priority? What would that look like for me? And as much as I thought I had made myself a priority, I can see the areas in my life where I have not. I can see the areas in my life where I was not my priority. Because if I was my priority, the decisions that I made, I would not have made. So if I'm making myself a priority, then in the example of doing this show, then I'm going to show up and do this show because I know I can. I know I am capable. And if there's an area that I feel like I'm not capable, I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn and I'm going to figure it out because that's growth. And through that, I'm going to learn so much more than I would if I just gave up. Giving up is not an option in my life anymore. Making myself a priority is an option. And that's the choice that I get to make, and that's the choice that I get to take further. It's a choice that we all get to take. So I welcome you to show up. I welcome you to make that choice. Make you a priority. Ask yourself, what would it look like if you made yourself a priority? What would it look like if you took a chance on you? What would it look like if you let that little nudge that tells you that you can be the voice that you listen to? What would it look like if you were your priority? How would you answer questions differently to other people? How would you show up in the world? How would that make a difference in your day-to-day activities? And for me, that's coming down to thinking about food. Like, if I'm my own priority, am I going to make certain choices with food? Options that is only gratifying in the moment, but I know and ultimately is not going to have me feeling a certain way in about 30 minutes after, or maybe a day after, or maybe a few days after that, because now I'm going to gain some weight from all of these choices that I make that was gratifying in the moment. Was that making me a priority? No, that was choosing instant gratification. And that doesn't look like making a priority for me. Making a priority for me would be that this morning I chose to go get a green smoothie instead of having that cup of coffee. I chose to make, eggs and spinach and some cilantro for lunch instead of eating something fried and quick and fast. That looks like me making a priority to myself. How else would me being a priority to myself look? Well, it would look like setting boundaries. It would look like speaking up for myself. It would look like I am making the choices that allow me to be the best in that moment. So I challenge you to ask that question to yourself. What does that look like if you are showing up as a priority in your life? And this doesn't mean that the other people in our lives are not priority. That is definitely not what I'm saying. It's more so saying that you have to be your own priority. Because if we wait for somebody else to make us their priority, we're still never prioritizing our own needs, our own what is best for us scenario. We are prioritizing someone else's. And at the end of the day, at the end of every day, if I can look back and go, how did I make myself a priority? How did I show up for myself? And what can I do better tomorrow? Those are all good questions to ask. And by doing that, and by making ourselves a priority, those people that are priorities in our life are going to get a better version of us. They're going to get a version of us that is very strong, very inept, very capable. So they get to see that, especially when that comes to our children. When our children are watching us, seeing that we are making these choices to show up as the priority in our life, meaning that we are making these better choices for ourselves, what do you think that they're going to do for themselves? What choices do you think that they'll make by seeing that we are making ourselves a priority? I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say some of those choices that they'll make will start to follow suit with us, because we do instill these habits and behaviors and beliefs into our children. So if we're not stepping into the world as the best version of ourselves, then what are we giving them? I want to be able to give that to them. And I know that I have learned from the fact that I haven't always been that. I haven't always been the best version of myself. And I know that, 5 years down the road, the version of myself today will be version of myself then will be completely different than it is today. Because that's that evolution. But my children get to see that. They get to see that I'm choosing to show up as the best version of me, as that priority, making the choices that are going to allow me to live a longer, healthier life. Now, I can't predict what could happen, 5 minutes from now, but I can control the choices that I make that will allow me to do the best that I can to prolong everything I can. Because that's making myself a priority. For so long in my life, I let so many other things be a priority. I was a people pleaser, complete people pleaser. And, I would bow down to whatever somebody else would say in a sense of, hey, you're right. Okay. Because, the non-confrontational side of me didn't want to have that. The non-confrontational side of me, keeps myself from saying what I would really feel. And that is a lot of healing and learning and growing that I've had to do as well. Am I 100% there? No. Do I still, have that layer of people pleasing? Absolutely. But am I working through it? 100%. And that's called making myself a priority. So that healing gets to take place. And that evolution gets to take place. I get to learn. I get to grow. We all get to do that. I admire those people that go back to high school, to get this diploma, and they're in their 70s and 80s. They didn't have to do that. Why do you think that they chose to? Well, chances were there was a part of them that wanted to keep that commitment to themselves, to show up and do it because they knew they could. Their age didn't matter. but showing up did. Showing up and making that choice to put themselves as that priority, that mattered. So every day we get to make that choice. And so how are you going to make you a priority? How are you going to show up that reflects that? And that's going to end my little solo chat. And I hope you all consistently reach for the infinite. That potential is within us all. And with that, I say bye.